Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s, Season 1, Episode 10. And the stories in this episode are called The Shadow Man, The Uncle Devil Show, and Opening Day. So, spoilers, of course, for the episode. This is a Patreon-sponsored review, so thank you to Cindy for picking this show. And I am delighted to say that we have another winner in the bunch. Not that the whole episode is nothing but winners. Because the middle and the last story they have their moments, but they're more just kind of like okay. The first story, though, is The Shadow Man, and that is directed by Joe Dante, which I didn't know going in, but I saw his name at the start and went, oh, hello. If you don't know who Joe Dante is, he directed a bunch of movies like Gremlins, The Burbs, stuff like that, and notably did one of the segments in the Twilight Zone movie. So was delighted to see his name. I like him a lot. I think he's a really kind of unsung hero of like 80s and 90s movies. And he's usually really good at working with kids and having like fun kind of like coming of age style stuff. You know, he also did a movie called Explorers, which came out the same year as Goonies and shares a lot of parallels with that. In fact, one of the actors from Explorers is in this. He's the Billy character in this. But this story is about a 13-year-old who's like a super smart kid. He gets bullied. The girl that he's super into doesn't really pay attention to him. In fact, her boyfriend, who's the bully, kind of sets up a prank on him early on and embarrasses him. And it's a whole thing. But what it sets up is that he's a bit of a scaredy cat, and even his parents are concerned that he still sleeps with multiple lights on. He has the TV on. He has the radio on. I felt a little bit attacked here because even today I enjoy listening to something to go to sleep to. Not because of fear. I'm not scared of the silence. It's more just I'll think about a lot of things I don't want to think about if I'm sitting there silently. It's quite distressing. So, but he's petrified, and the mother comes in and says, "No, you're turning your lights off. You're going to sleep. You're a young man now. You're at that age. You cannot be scared of the dark anymore." And once the lights are off, the Shadow Man appears, a shadowy figure who comes out from under his bed. Isn't quite a shadow, like, you know, literally, but is all dressed in black, always in super silhouette, so you can't see any details. It's just a black figure, a black silhouette of a person. And the notable detail that sticks out about him is that he's got kind of a hat on that's like a, you know, it's got the brim around it. I wouldn't call it like a fedora or even a cowboy hat, but it's something sort of in between those kind of ranges. And he says something. He says, "I am the Shadow Man, and I will not harm the one whose bed I live under," or something to that effect. So, you know, the boy is petrified. Jonathan, or sorry, that's the actor's name. Danny is the character. Danny's petrified of this. And the Shadow Man goes out, it's whatever, and the next day he's with his friend at school and he's telling him this story, and even adds on a little bit we didn't know, which is that he said, "Oh, I thought I could hear someone coming back in and closing the window, like as I was getting up, or just before I woke up, or something like that." So it's like, okay, where's this going? I'm very curious. The visual of the Shadow Man was already kind of interesting at this point. But then as he's walking into school, we overhear other kids talk about the fact that two teens were attacked in the park last night, and some tall guy in a hat, and like the survivor said they couldn't even see like his face. It was like he wasn't real or something, and that obviously freaks out Danny, and he's like, "Oh, holy crap, this is the thing that left my bedroom." Notably, one of the girls in the scene that's sort of in the little crowd talking about it, she looked familiar. I looked her up. I think it's the daughter from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, like a few years prior to that. Just a weird face that I happened to catch. But so this is where the story's going, though. But where it actually develops from here is that while Danny's still scared for like the next night, and the Shadow Man comes out again, he says the same thing. He leaves. Someone else is attacked. He starts to grow confidence. He starts to stop being scared because the Shadow Man keeps saying, "I will not harm the one whose bed I live under." So he starts to get a little bit cocky. In fact, it gives him a little confidence boost where when he overhears the girl he likes complain that she needs to study for an algebra test and her bully boyfriend isn't going to be there to help her, he intentionally shows up at her place at night, and at this point in the story, they've made it very clear that all of the kids are all scared to go out when it's dark because of this like attacker who's on the loose and is killed. I mean, they never actually say killed, I don't think, but the implication is he's killing kids. So it's actually quite dark in the implication, even though they never quite say it. But there's kind of a fun vibe to this, I will say. But he shows this confidence. He shows up at her house and says, "Hey, I overheard you talking to your boyfriend." Feels weird that he didn't just like offer to help in the diner where he heard this in the first place. But he shows up, says, "Hey, we could go for a walk if you want." And she's like, "No, you come in here." And then next day at school, she's all buddy with him because he helped her, which makes the Billy mad. The Billy wants to challenge him to a fight. And our main character, Danny's like, "Yeah, but not here. I'll fight you tonight at 9 o'clock in the park." And he's like, "But that's where the killer has been hanging out. He's been attacking people in the park." And this all comes back to the opening scenes where the Billy called Danny a chicken because he got scared of some Halloween costumes in a prank. So he's basically saying, "Hey, you're a chicken if you don't come out and see me at 9 o'clock. So we see just how confident Danny's becoming when he's getting ready to go out for this fight, and he's combing his hair like he's a little slick kid. And the Shadow Man comes out from under his bed because it's getting dark, and he says his usual thing: "I am the Shadow Man. I will never harm the one whose bed I live under." And he actually says it this time because Danny just confirms it. He's like, "Hey, you'll never hurt me, right?" He's like, "No, I will never harm the person whose bed I live under." And then he's like, "Cool, we got that sorted." And he just goes back to combing his hair. So he's actually becoming kind of unlikable, which is kind of where I was really starting to get kind of the vibe of what the Shadow Man kind of represents in a weird way. Is this idea of like how the fears of being a young kid, when you get over that fear, you know, maybe it's the dark, that's a really common one, but it could be anything, that you almost feel a little too invincible when you're coming of age. I think, you know, people often say that when you're young, you feel like you'll live forever and you can do anything. I think it's kind of tapping into that a little bit, because you know, when you first get over a fear, when you're at that kind of like adolescent age where you realize something you thought was scary isn't scary anymore, or you've figured something out. Maybe it's not even a fear, maybe you just understand something in a way you didn't before. You almost feel like, oh hey, I can do anything. And that can be a little, you know, overconfidence. And so the big ending to the episode is that he meets the Billy out in the park. He's talking a big game, he's kind of stalling, and then all of a sudden the Shadow Man appears behind Danny. And the Billy character freaks out, runs away, and even yells to Danny to run. Like, he's actually even showing concern for the kid that he wants to beat up as he runs away. Because, well, he wants to punch his teeth down his throat, he doesn't necessarily want to kill him. Danny's acting all cocky, and he's like, hey, go after him. And the Shadow Man just steps towards Danny, and because he kept reiterating throughout the whole episode that every time we saw the Shadow Man, he says the same thing: I will never harm the one whose bed I live under. I thought, well, that's going to come back in a big way. You know, he's going to move to a different bed or something, and it's going to spell doom for the main character. That's not actually quite what they did here. What actually happens is that this is just a different Shadow Man. He just steps in, he says the same thing again: I will never harm the one whose bed I live under, but I'm from someone else's bed. And then Danny's face drops, and he picks him up by the throat, and the episode just ends there. I think the narration comes in as Danny's been held by his neck. The implication that this Shadow Man's got him. You know, the idea that someone else's overconfidence is come for him. Yeah, it's very much a learning a lesson kind of episode. It feels very much like it could have been an episode of what was that show? Are You Afraid of the Dark? Maybe Goosebumps, maybe something like that. But I really liked this. I think the vibe of it was just perfect, right? There's lots of just fun little things. Like when the Billies are luring him into the trap to scare him with the Halloween costumes at the start of the story. Like they lure him in because the Billy sends out his girlfriend like from behind the hedge. Kind of like when Michael Myers comes out from the hedge in Halloween. The girl steps out from there, but because obviously it's the girl that the main character's got a crush on, she comes out in slow motion and the hair's blowing in the wind, and it's this magical moment, and he's going up to her, and it just has a really playful, kind of fun 80s vibe, which is something that Joe Dante was very good at doing, was giving you entertaining kid characters who aren't annoying, who feel like they're real people. Maybe they're a little bit entertainmentized, if you will. But like, it's something that Joe Dante was always very good at. It's something I always liked about Explorers. It's something I liked about Small Soldiers, which he also did. To a lesser extent, Gremlins, because the characters in that aren't teenagers anymore. But yeah, there's a lot of that in here. A lot of, like, you can tell it's a Joe Dante story, right? Or at least directed, because the way he handles the kid actors is very good. It's well paced. It never falters. It develops as it goes. Once you get kind of the hook in as to, like, okay, the Shadow Man's leaving his room and going and attacking people during the night, it's like, okay, that sets something interesting up, and you're kind of thinking, okay, where's it going from here? And it's when you see the main character start to change his personality, you're like, oh, this is going to be a comeuppance story. He's going to learn a harsh lesson here. Almost like he's getting too big for his britches, and thus we have that I'm from under a different bed, which I can't. It's not obviously scary in like the super intense way, but it's a really fun, spooky story, right? It's a really good, like, it just so happens that this is coming out on Halloween, and I feel like this is the perfect story of this show to be talking about on Halloween because of the vibes, because it really does have that Are You Afraid of the Dark style energy to it. I really can't emphasize that enough, like just how atmospheric this kind of turned. Like, it's exactly the right kind of thing I want from this type of story. I have very little complaints, honestly. It was another good one. I don't think it's necessarily the best story of the show that we've had, just because something like Nightcrawler's just hit a lot harder. This is not hard hitting. This is more of a parable for young people, but it's a really effective one, and it's a really cool, creepy story. Like the Shadow Man. Like, if anything, he made me think of like the Spectre or the oh god, what's that old pulpy character with the hat? God, there was a Batman crossover with this character a few years ago, and I can't remember his name. But I'm forgetting. But it feels like a villain of a different era. It feels kind of timeless in a weird way, which is kind of cool. Despite how 80s it feels in terms of its setting and tone and style and character type. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have like anything super deep to say about it, other than just it's really entertaining and fun and has some good spooky visuals. I dug it a lot. So that's the Shadow Man. The second story, the little one in the middle, right? This is the Uncle Devil show. There's not a ton to say about this one, really, just because it's really simple. It's a one note thing, and a lot of these little short 5-minute ones tend to be, which is that this kid is watching a videotape of what's supposed to be like a kid's like TV show with a host talking and teaching them about things, but it's actually this guy called Uncle Devil who's teaching him to do bad things, telling him to eat, more ice cream and snacks between meals. Talks about putting snakes into cereal boxes and all sorts, and seemingly the magic set or whatever it is that he's got from mail order with the tape is actually letting the kid turn things, like the vase ends up full of cockroaches. He turns his dad's head into like a lizard. He makes a dinosaur walk outside. Obviously, the effects here are pretty goofy and cheap because it's an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. We're not watching Jurassic Park. But the main gist of it and the main sort of message of it ultimately is that the parents aren't paying attention to what he's watching. And it's kind of like a sort of tongue-in-cheek, a little ironic, because the entire time they're not paying attention to him, they are talking about the kid. The mother's basically just constantly bringing up different things, like, oh, the teacher said he's really attentive and he'd take to home learning, maybe we should do this. And the mother keeps suggesting stuff, and the dad is just trying to read his newspaper, but he's not like abrasive about it. He doesn't like snap or say he wants to be left alone. He just kind of, like, every time the wife says something about the son or asks about his opinion on it, he just kind of folds the paper down for a second and goes, yeah, that sounds great, honey, and then goes back to reading his paper. He's clearly not really paying attention. He's clearly not actually considering what the options here for his son are. And even the mother, who's constantly talking about the son in theory and is constantly talking about him like her son's her hobby, she's talking about him in the way that someone talks about how they're really into, I don't know, pick something, like Someone's getting into like pottery and they're making pots and clay and all that shit. So they're just talking about different techniques. She's just doing that, but with parenting. She's talking about all these things enthusiastically, but anytime the son's doing something in the background or whatever he's watching, where the character's literally saying, "I am Uncle Devil, do more bad things," they're not even noticing a whiff of it. And that's it. That's the point of the story. It's that simple. I don't think there's much more to it. I mean, obviously at the end, everything goes back to normal, and it's kind of left like, oh, did all that stuff really happen, or was it all in the kid's imagination? But the cockroaches that were in the vase are still there, so it's a little bit spooky. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But that's it. Not much to say. It's all right for what it is, though. Like, I mean, the point it's making is solid enough, and it has a little bit of fun with the visuals, but that's about it. So, it's hard to make a 5-minute story be like memorable or have enough character to really sort of attach. Because I got really into the Shadow Man stuff in the first story. Here, I could see like a longer version of this where they really develop it being quite good as a concept, but they kept it simple, quick 5-minute story, and there it is. The final story is called Opening Day, and it's about an assassination plot, effectively, by a wife and her, like, what's the male version of mistress? She's cheating on her husband with a guy, right? So she's cheating on her husband, who's named Carl, with a guy named Joe. And Joe and Carl are friends. In fact, Joe is like his instructor for the duck hunting club that he's in, or whatever it is, which is what Opening Day is. It's duck hunting season, and the plan is to kill him when they're out in the boat hunting ducks. That's where we kind of go, but we kind of set stuff up the day before when they're at like a house party, and it establishes that she's having an affair with this man. In fact, we meet him for the first time and he comes up to her, and it seems like she's like hitting off his advances, but it turns out no, they're actually do have a relationship. It's in secret, and she is the one goading him into killing the husband. She wants rid of her husband, and that kind of sets up the story. Now, I should mention that the husband character, Carl, is played by Jeffrey Jones, who you might recognize from a couple of things. I think he's in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, a couple other stuff from around, the 80s into the early 90s. However, it's worth pointing out that he was convicted, I believe, for really bad child stuff. I'll just say, I'll put it delicately. So it's hard not to think about that a little bit when he pops up on screen. It's kind of distracting because I'm like, oh, I know what you're doing or what you're going to do, and it's a bit whatever. But putting that aside, this story it's okay. I think it gets probably the lion's share of the runtime of the episode, and it's not a bad idea per se. I feel like I've seen Twilight Zone specifically pull this type of idea off a little bit better, because ultimately what it is that once the murder happens and we see Joe push Carl into the water and hold him down till he drowns and then claims it's an accident, basically he goes back to like the woman's house, and he's expecting to like explain to her that the plans went through and that's it, it's done, he's dead. But instead the kids run in, and then she runs in, and all of a sudden it's like reality's warped, and now he's always been her husband and these are his kids. And he's a little confused but happy about it at first. But then as it goes on, it becomes clear that the next day is the party the episode started with. And now Carl, who was the husband, is playing the role of the friend who's probably having the affair with the wife. So now Joe spends like the rest of the episode paranoid that he's going to kill him. So he's planning to kill the opposite version of him now, when he's going out for the duck hunt. Like, he's going to defend himself and be like, I'm going to kill him. And then at the end, it kind of like does a thing where it's pretty clear that all of this was in his head in the moments where he was about to kill the husband. He was going to kill Carl. But then Carl kind of turns around at the last second and doesn't even find out that he was going to be killed. He just kind of like knocks him into the water by accident, effectively. And Joe is dead, and Carl comes home and has to explain to the wife. And the thing about the ending is that the wife expects it to be Joe. She's still expecting Joe to have killed her husband. So when her husband walks in, it kind of confirms that this is just reality. And reality always was that Carl was her husband and that she wanted Joe to kill him. But when Joe was about to do it, he ended up having this like vision of like always being the husband. So it's kind of mixing two different Twilight Zone tropes together here. One is that it's putting him in the shoes of his victim, right? And Twilight Zone's definitely done that, right? The characters who are racist have to live out a day as the people that they were mocking or bigoted against, or someone like, so they're doing the whole shoe swapping thing, right? There's that, but also the idea of like the story all taking place in that moment before they die, right? The idea that it's on that moment, they see how it plays out, but then it snaps back to it and they meet their demise, right? Twilight Zone has done that before too. So it's kind of like just mashing those two ideas together where you get to see both elements play out together, which honestly, like, it kind of just made it a little bit more confusing at points. Like, by the end I got it. By the end I understood what reality was and what had effectively just happened. But the moment in the boat when the murder's going to happen for the second time, and he fades to the clothes he was wearing for the first murder, and then we see that he fails to actually murder Carl, and Carl's like distraught. Oh, my best friend drowned, and like I tried to hold my hand out. I tried to hold the gun out so he could grab it, and he just wouldn't do it, which suggests that he was guilty, and that was eating at him. And which, to be fair, he does say at the start when he's talking to the wife, when the wife's trying to convince him to kill her husband, he's like, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can take a human being's life. So he clearly was conflicted about it, right? So Carl never finds out that he was almost murdered and that his best friend was having an affair with his wife. The wife just looks a little... I don't even know what the word to use is. Like, I guess it's a mixture of disappointment, but also relief that she wasn't caught. Like, she didn't get rid of her husband, but no one knows that she was involved in trying to kill him. No one knows there was even an attempted murder. So she kind of like breaks out even and gets to just, live with this. And it's like, well, one of them's gone. I guess that makes her life a bit more simple, but yeah, I think the biggest concern or the biggest problem I had with this is that it felt like it was building up to the initial murder, right? We introduced the characters and they plot, they scheme, a couple of jokes are had, and it builds up. He takes them out early in the morning, sun's just rising, the horn or the bell tolls for the start of duck hunting season, and the murder happens. And when it happened, I was like, oh, there's a lot of runtime left. Like, what's the rest of this? And I suppose I was thinking, oh, it's probably going to be a comeuppance story again, just like Shadow Man, just like a lot of Twilight Zone stories. And that's fine. And it kind of is a comeuppance in a way. It does feel a little bit frustrating when it gets to the point where it's repeating a lot of the same scenes, but with the actors having flipped roles. And like Joe's getting more and more agitated because he thinks this means that the Carl version, who's now the best friend instead of the husband, is going to try and kill him. Like, I get where the tension's supposed to come from that, but like once I got the point and I understood what they were doing, it actually felt a little bit tedious, like playing out all the other beats that they wanted to play out, which is, suggesting that we get up early and go duck hunting, the picking him up in the car, the going out in the boat. Like, I think it was meant to be like more tense because it was, I don't know, but like we're supposed to be like, oh, what's going to happen next? How's it going to play out this time? But something about it did feel just a little bit like, oh, we're going through the motions here. I don't want to say it's padding to get it to the right runtime necessarily, because I think that's maybe a bit harsh. I just think maybe they should have, I don't know, changed things up a little bit rather than just have like the events that happened earlier play out with the two roles switched. I think it might have been more interesting if you establish what this new married life is like, have Joe not question the fact that reality seemed to change around him, and then introduce the best friend as a surprise, but in a different context, right? Have him fear that the husband that used to be the best friend, or sorry, the best friend that used to be the husband, rather, have him fear that he's going to try and kill him in a new scenario that's not the exact same as before. I get that playing it out the same way is kind of an intentional choice to have, like, you know, like a sense of poetry to it, where you can see how things deviate and how things are a little bit different. At a certain point, it's maybe just too repetitive feeling, and I do wonder if this would have played a little bit better if they were in a different, maybe a similar situation where they were on their own, where they were out somewhere where one of them could make an attack, and you had the paranoia build. Like, that paranoia is maybe something they really, really need to hone in on Joe, who's feeling guilty about the fact that he's killed Carl, or in reality, he's about to kill Carl, and he's just imagining the happiness that he's going to get, but then the guilt coming of all the stuff that he's thinking about. So yeah, at the end, he never actually killed him. He actually fell into the water and did not live. So yeah, it's okay. Like I think the idea is solid enough, but it does feel like a mishmash of like Twilight Zone tropes. Like I said, you've got both the living a day in your victim's shoes and feeling the dread that they felt. And you see that, you see him like get agitated and accuse the wife of having an affair, because he knows that she was having an affair when he was not the husband. So he's like, hey, I know about the motels and I know about this, and she's like, you're crazy, I don't know what you're talking about. And I actually don't know, in the alternate like reality that he envisions, if she actually was having an affair. It never confirms that, I don't think. You just kind of assume she was because she was in the real world. Yeah, the ideas are solid. I just think it plays out a little bit drawn out and repetitive the further it went on. And the final sort of ending, I guess I thought it was going to be more interesting. I think it's snapping back to, oh, it's just before he was going to kill him and he doesn't actually do it, felt a little bit lackluster, because it felt like an old trick at this point, as opposed to something that recontextualized everything. Him just like imagining all this playing out in his head the seconds before he's going to do the murder feels like, oh, that feels like a more normal reveal that we've seen before, and at least in some different ways. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this Twilight Zone. You can, of course, support the show. You can support all the reviews over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And of course, you can like, subscribe, let me know what you thought of the episodes and the stories down in the comments below. But that is me, so thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.